Hello, everybody. It's David J. Murphy here with an interview with photographer Chris Burkard. And Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of your history with photography. What's your experience with the work?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been doing this as a career path for about 20 years.
Wow.
I'm 40 now. I started at 18, 19. And, my path really emerged from action sports. I was a surf photographer for many years, shooting for magazines and cutting my teeth, shooting for editorial, all kinds of titles. And that was really how I kind of emerged into the craft. And then it kind of slowly evolved into more commercial work, more branded work, which is kind of now still these days a big part of what I do. And with that, making films, a lot of times adventure films, environmental films, kind of advocacy films around all kinds of different subjects. But that's kind of been for me probably the most exciting part of my work, the ability to travel. It's taken me all over the world. It's been a real gift. And I think nowadays, the way I look at the craft is more of just, photography is really just one tool in the tool belt, right? It's just one aspect of, I think, what I try to bring to the table when I feel inspired to share something or a place or a person that's bigger than myself. I'm thinking about how I could share that story. And yeah, that's kind of been what it's looked like for me over the last 20 years.
That's awesome. And what's bringing you to us today, obviously, is your sort of brand deal with Pelican. You're doing a pretty cool collaboration with them to create, not only, I would say, a commercial, but really sort of a short film, if you will, to help promote some of the bags and the gear that Pelican sells. So talk to us a little about this collaboration. How did it come to be? And that's what I think is most interesting first off.
Yeah, for sure. So what I do best is beat the hell out of gear. And sadly, many of my cameras have not lived to tell the tale, but most of my Pelican cases over the last 20 years have. And what's interesting to me is when I was a fledgling young surf photographer, there was a couple key pieces of equipment. A water housing was one of them, and a Pelican case was another one that you had to have in addition to your camera gear, right? Because I was going on boats, I was always by the ocean, I was always dragging these things all over the world. I've spent nights in Russian jail cells with my Pelican case.
Oh my gosh.
Been on boats that have collapsed and capsized with my Pelican case. So needless to say, when they reached out 20 years later and were like, hey, we'd love to work with you, I was like, I got endless stories. In fact, even in this video behind me, there's like a whole stack of them over there that I've had for as longer than any camera I've ever owned. So I guess what I'm saying at the point is that there's this natural connection to the work that I've done and the products. And when they came to the table and they said, hey, we want to take that same level of quality that we've created in these hard cases and place them into like a travel line, I was like, epic. I'm your guy. Let me test it. Let me try it. And that's really what it started as, just testing product. And I took this new Aegis 4-wheel roller, which is like what I normally would travel around the world with nowadays if I'm traveling carry-on, lugging, $30,000, $40,000 worth of gear in a small case. You basically entrust these things with your livelihood. And so that's what I did. And then, the relationship grew and it evolved. And there was this really cool opportunity to maybe create something a little more visual, a little more storytelling, which for this brand, they've never had to really do because their products kind of speak for themselves. And they've always been really rooted in that kind of use case, hardworking, application scenario, never needed to like tell more of a lifestyle journey, which to me was exciting because obviously, these cases, these tools that we use, they have a life force. And in many ways, to me, they have some kind of a story along with it. And so we opted to go out into the Southwest, one of my favorite areas, the Great Sand Dunes National Park, and create this beautiful campaign. It was a landscape that it's really inspired me over the last many years when I've been shooting there, aerial photography. And so it kind of just worked out. It was a seamless integration.
That's awesome. Yeah, my personal experience with Pelican cases have been, I've only ever used those hard shell big cases,
Yeah.
For like transporting my gear to a specific location, throwing it onto the airport luggage system. And, I've always trusted that they're going to keep my gear safe, right? Because I mean, those things are built like tanks.
Yeah.
And so it's really neat that they've, expanded and branched out to, again, what's featured in the commercial, which are more like, camera bags and smaller bags and things like that. And so, yeah, we'll definitely talk about those bags here, because I do want to know more about them and how they operate and function and how they serve you as a photographer and how they could serve anyone who might be, interested in them for their gear. But to get back to what you said, so years ago, you said they reached out to you, they discovered you as someone who was making a name for himself as a photographer, reached out to you as sort of a testing, say, hey, can you test out our stuff? And then it led to this eventual ad campaign. Is that basically how the story went?
Yeah. I mean, I was already obviously an avid user and somebody who had collected a slew of cases over the course of my whole career. And so when they did reach out, I was like, yeah, I'm your guy. I'll beat these things up. And that has always actually really been boded me well in the past. Being somebody who's been really hard on gear, being somebody who is fairly well traveled, and they know that I'm going to put it in situations that maybe most people wouldn't, but the goal is that if it can survive this, it should be able to survive almost anything. So I really take a lot of pride in that in my career. It's been really fun to do.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that campaign itself, because like you said, this is a first for Pelican to create what's I think a really beautiful ad campaign. So kudos to whoever the director of photography was on this, because they shot just a magnificent, not only film, but really art piece, in my opinion. Talk to me about the creation of this actual kind of story and narrative that went into telling the story about this gear. Was this something you wrote, or was this something Pelican wrote and gave to you, or was there a third party? How did this sort of story develop?
It was a mixture of a few things, actually. I would say that first and foremost, I was super honored that kind of the campaign was sort of built around my, I guess you could say, my livelihood in some capacity. The detour, which originally, insider tip, it was originally going to be called the Side Quest, which was kind of equally as funny, but it's sort of this sentiment that the best adventures are the ones that are unplanned. And if you have everything is organized and sorted, you're probably going to leave a lot of mystery on the table. And so that was kind of the sentiment around the campaign. And it was a collaborative effort between Will Kutcher, who was the director, really talented guy, shot a lot for Filson over the years, and the internal marketing team at Pelican, who they have brought in a lot of really great new people to just breathe some life into the brand. And you can see it. And I was pretty honored to work alongside both of them to kind of bring this together. And it was a bit of a his, hers, and ours situation where I really was pushing for this location. And then the team kind of came through with the idea, and we kind of built it around this whole inception of like, well, what happens if you just keep saying yes to opportunities? Where do you end up? And the point of it, which obviously it's simple, it's not a long piece by any means, but it's meant to get you thinking, that if you become somebody who's willing to say yes, amazing experiences could be out there just waiting for you.
Absolutely. That's kind of my philosophy on life as well. It's like, why turn down opportunities? Like go for the adventure. So talk to me about the actual Aegis series camera bags. So specifically the PX25 and XX5. These are the ones featured in the ad campaign, and the ones I imagine you use yourself personally. So talk to me about these specific camera bags. What do they offer to the photographer, and how do they exude Pelican's well-known name of gear protection?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ultimately, the entire line is built upon like a semi-rigid protection, right? So it doesn't matter if you're using the crossbody or using the backpack, or specifically the roller, which is my absolute favorite product in the line. It has some element of protection where, you've got some, if you have some sensitive lenses in there, a laptop, like I've never utilized anything else that moves as easily through rough terrain or an airport that still managed to keep your gear nice and protected. And if you're shoving stuff overhead or shoving stuff under a plane, the last thing you want to worry about is like, a lens getting cracked or something like that. Now there's limitations there for sure. But I would say that to answer your question, the use case really is somebody who needs that extra added level of protection. Maybe they're sliding this backpack in the back of a truck and there's other items around it. if you need the hard Pelican case, that's kind of like the most extreme scenario. But for most of us, most of the time when we're just kind of driving around, shooting photos from the car or occasionally doing a hike out somewhere, this is really that sweet spot, right? So I think it's not going to be for those out there, middle of nowhere, multi-day remote excursions, because a lot of the bags are a bit more limited. They're more meant to carry just what you need. But with that incredibly intelligent design, suited to kind of like take on any extra pieces, a tripod or water bottle, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that at the end of the day, it's the protection that makes the biggest difference, not just in the panels, but in the zippers as well. They're also just best when broken in. I'll just be honest with you. These things are meant to be worn, meant to get, a little abused, I guess you could say. And we did that really well on the shoot. And I actually think that the patina is what makes them like really beautiful, because unlike most bags that you kind of wear down, they start to kind of fall apart. They fray. This thing just was epic the whole time. So I'd say like that's really the use case that I've utilized them for. I think that where they really shine for me is in that kind of short-term, travel stint when I've got to get from my house to the airport to a foreign country. And it's kind of something that's going to be on planes, trains, and automobiles in many ways. But I don't need necessarily that full submersion waterproof protection, right? So that's the only caveat that I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this, in the way you describe it, offers kind of like a middle ground between the super hard shell protection of the Pelican and basically cloth that most camera bags are made out of. Because I'll be honest, like I have a host of camera bags. I could probably bring them out here. There's like a mountain of them, literally, and none of them are like hard shell at all. They're all like compression, and they'll, if somebody ran over it with a car, it's going to get compressed, destroyed. And I know, realize obviously that these bags may not be that strong, but again, the idea that you can comfortably put them and stack them perhaps on other packages, at least a degree of security.
Exactly. And not to get into the weeds with it, but actually as somebody who is quite techie with the bags that I use, and I own, if I move this camera around, there's like hundreds of bags in here.
Yeah.
What I really appreciate is that a lot of camera bags, they require your padded camera insert to create the rigidity for you. You slide this insert in, and then that becomes exactly the only structure you have. With this, the structure is built in, right? There's a semi-rigid structure. So what's nice is they kind of hold up and the bags like stand up on their own. And I really appreciate that because when you remove the camera, and even if you just have a laptop and some personal items, they still work just as well, right? Still malleable, not overbuilt like you're carrying a hard case. So it does strike a sweet middle ground that I think most people haven't actually seen before. I will say.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of the specifics of the Detour itself, and in terms of the filming of it. How long of a production was this to shoot? And, what were some of the difficulties you faced? Obviously it's scripted, but obviously there's, I'm sure, things that weren't expected. And that's kind of what the film exudes, is that idea that you have to be, prepared for the unexpected.
Yeah. So ultimately, shooting in the summer, anytime you're going to try to get into an ultralight aircraft, an experimental aircraft, which is what we did for the shoot. We filmed flying around the Great Sand Dunes National Park, which is, for me, one of the most texturally beautiful things I've ever done. And full disclosure, like, obviously this is a scripted piece. These are activities I've done before. And I wanted to kind of roll them into a storyline that I felt was, captured the soul of the Southwest. And to me, that soul, it is the ranchers and the cowboys and these big landscapes and the people who have managed to, in some way, kind of not tame these places, but harmoniously work with them, right? Which is what you get when you're crossing the sand dunes and you see somebody packing horses, or when you see somebody take off in an experimental trike and fly over the dunes, right? These are characters that kind of symbolize the ingenuity of the Southwest, because that, to me, that's what it's all about. And so I know that we're not telling a deep story, but as a storyteller and somebody that cares about that, I wanted to showcase people that kind of, to me, reflected the wildness of those places. One of the challenges easily was the thermals in the morning. When it gets hot up in the San Luis Valley, it sits about 8,000 feet of altitude. So in the summertime, those thermals just start to shoot up and you can't fly at all, basically about 40 minutes after the sun rises. So we had to get up at 4 a.m. and fly from the airport in Alamogordo over to the sand dunes, and we had a couple passes, and then basically the ride back was so bumpy and gnarly and not casual. I mean, you are in an open craft, right? And you're feeling all of that lift from the wind. So I'd say that was one of the bigger challenges. And just a little bit something we had to be thoughtful of. We weren't really aware of it going into it, that we were only going to have like 1 hour in the morning to fly. But we made the most of it. And then obviously, getting up to the sand dunes, you are hiking with camera gear. There were definitely a handful of people that were a little bummed on me for motivating the crew to keep pushing, because I wanted to get to like the really epic dunes that are back there. But you're hiking at 9,000 feet of altitude. Wow. On the highest altitude sand dune plateau in North America, and they're carrying big heavy gear. And so I felt like what made it special was the effort everybody put in to capture something that really has, in my opinion, not been seen. It's really rare that you're going to see a cinema camera out on those sand dunes, because it is such a unique environment. So to me, that was kind of, it was all those little micro challenges that actually made it really cool. And we had crazy rain, we had wild weather, we had super gnarly wind, and you're just having to kind of deal with that stuff and move on the fly a little bit, which gives way to usually something unexpected.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What did you all shoot with, by the way, for this commercial?
I was shooting all my stills on my Sony camera. I want to say that the team was shooting on some Aries, a red, and then some smaller like DSLR bodies. But it was a mixture of a couple different things, obviously. And then we were a bit limited shooting in the craft. That's the cool thing, is on the trike itself, you can put a couple mounts on the wings, but those are like basically screwed into just that one tiny little thing, on the bottom of the camera, right? Your little like mount, and with a backup clip. So like, it's not the easiest thing to shoot inside of, I guess you could say, yeah, and it makes it challenging and it makes it fun, but I also think that's what makes it super unique. So we had to rely upon a couple other kind of smaller action style cameras to capture a couple of the moments and stuff as well.
Absolutely. And, obviously you're a filmmaker yourself. You've got a host of, amazing documentary films on your website. And, obviously you were shooting stills because you were the subject, but did you shoot any video with your cameras that got incorporated into the commercial, or was it all the video?
A little. Yeah, I did. The only stuff that I really shot was when I was in the ultralight trike flying over. I shot a little bit of like POV, my perspective, right, with a super wide lens. I actually, a lot of times when I'm shooting in those scenarios, there's one lens I really like. It's a prime lens. It's a prime fisheye made by Voigtlander. And it's just super sharp, really, really small. I mean, almost pancake style, but it's got a fixed aperture of f/5.6. And so that thing is just something that I really love to utilize when I'm filming in the air, because we're going to push in a little bit on the crop. And you want that wide perspective, the canopy of the craft, and then when we tilt, you get the texture of the dune. So I really loved those shots. That was just something that I contributed a little bit to the piece, and I felt like turned out really well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everything in the commercial was beautifully shot.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how you pack your gear. And obviously, do you pack differently when it comes to the gear, like, for the Aegis series, because there is the travel pack and the padded sling and the things like that. Like I've only ever used typically a backpack style camera bag, and then I might have a little sort of shoulder sling, smaller bag. But like, how do you sort of incorporate multiple different styles of bags when you go out on a shoot?
Yeah,
whether they're Pelican or otherwise.
Yeah, of course. So typically my go-to always, and obviously if I'm shooting a commercial assignment, I'm going to need to have a slightly more robust backpack oftentimes, and a larger shoulder bag that can accommodate, a camera and 3 lenses or something like that. So normally I would have a plus size version of what was in that campaign, right? If I'm out on assignment somewhere, I think that, that was more visually to showcase like, okay, you're just throwing it all in a bag and you're trusting that gear. This is what you need. And what's cool about that tiny side carry bag is that it does hold perfectly one camera, one lens, and an accessory or something. But I would say that usually the way that I'm operating is I will have a 40-liter backpack of some kind that has an easy top entry or something like that. And I would be putting my entire waist pack that's usually also like a kind of a lumbar pack, right? It would have a waist clip as well as a shoulder strap. And the reason being is because when I'm shooting, when I'm actively shooting, I want to be able to get in and out of my gear as fast as possible. And there cannot be any putting a backpack down. You know, and I'm typically oscillating between 3 lenses, a 16 to 35, a 24 to 70, and maybe a 70 to 200. That would just be like the general range. If I didn't have one of those, I might have a prime or two, but that would all be in my waist pack. And what I like to do is have my backpack just half packed so that I can take this whole thing and shove it in there, obviously. And then when the terrain gets more challenging, you've got to hike up to some mountain or you've got to hike up to a dune. The last thing I want to do is have weight on the front and on the back, right? Because that feels unstable. And so I think that for me, I'm oftentimes trying to build out my daily kit, thinking about like, okay, first and foremost, what do I need to survive, right? What do I actually need to survive? I need some food, some water, some layers. Okay. And then beyond that, what is the camera gear that's like critical? I have to have this. And then I would look at the space I have left and I'd be like, what are the extras that are going to be like good to bring? What's maybe an extra thing? If I have enough space for a longer lens, maybe I'll bring that. If it's a specialty lens, a night lens, a tripod. And so I kind of try to build my kit the same, where every time there's a jacket, there's some food, there's a headlamp in there, there's an extra camera charger or a battery charger that I could charge my camera. There's a watch. And that doesn't change. And it doesn't matter if I'm traveling halfway around the world for a speaking assignment, or if I'm going somewhere to shoot a camera assignment, my backpack and what is in that is usually the same. I could show you, I wish I could pull out some examples and show you, because I actually love talking about the art of packing. I think that it's something that I've tried to refine over the years. But I think what's really helpful is this one mantra, which is that the best camera is not the one you have with you, because if it's buried in the bottom of your pack, you're not going to pull it out. If it's hard to access, you're not going to use it. So the best camera is the one you're willing to use. And if that's your phone, great. If that's something that's right here, wonderful. If it can be pulled out and utilized, I really like to make my gear be super easily accessible. And I think that if it's not easily accessible, then I try to leave it at home.
Right. No, absolutely. And that makes perfect sense, right? If you can't get access to it, or if it takes too long to take it out or change lenses, it's like you kind of,
what's the point? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. If every time it feels stressful to get it out, it's like, oh, you're not going to create your best work, right?
No. And that's why I like some of the bags I have the little side pocket, you know, where it's like, it has the opening, right? And then you have a little thing where you can just kind of quickly, get the thing out. Yeah. Are there any sort of camera bags, or, again, going with Pelican, I mean, I know Pelican offers a wide range of bags, but are there any sort of like bag wish list items that you kind of think like, I would love to have, Pelican make this particular type of bag, or, something bigger or more versatile, or
it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's coming. And that's actually a big part of the partnership is, I bring to the table a lot of years of experience and also have an amazing pool of really talented friends that I get to put products in front of to test. And I think over the years, anytime I've tried to bring something to market with the brand, it's usually involved a lot of testing, but that's what we're hoping to do, is actually expand upon that, address some of the bigger needs for working professionals. And that's kind of always the thought, is like, we design for working professionals, and that filters down to the amateurs and everybody who aspires to do that, right? Because it has to meet that standard. So yes, the goal is like some larger bags, maybe some quicker in and out openings, some larger side pouches, and trying to really understand at this point because as bags get bigger, you have to be really thoughtful about how much protection is included, right? Because you got to be thoughtful of weight. Right. So I think that's the thought, is like, as they get bigger, where do we prioritize protection? Where do you want some waterproofing? Where do you want some nimbleness? Where do you create some side openings? Right. And I think that's where we're hoping to head, which is exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah. Maybe a suggestion, someone might hear this, but perhaps the Burkard collection in the future, or the Burkard collection in the future.
I love it. I'm all for that.
I know there's certain famous YouTube photographers who have their own special collections. Yeah. So that could be something, who knows, maybe somebody will hear about that. But, you know, where is sort of like someplace you would love to photograph and test all this gear? Like, is there sort of a mountain you want to climb, either literal or metaphorical, in terms of just putting yourself and your gear to the limits that you think like this gear would just be perfect for?
You know, I would say, in my experience, photographing volcanoes and volcanic environments is the place that truly tests your gear the most. I mean, imagine being in a place where like you can't put a camera bag on the ground because there's too much ash, or that ash is going to spread everywhere, or it's burnt ground, or whatever it is. And I always think back to that experience photographing in Iceland for National Geographic during the first, second, and third eruptions, and realizing how hostile and inhospitable the environment was. So I always picture, like, when I want to test gear, I think about that environment. How would it work if I have to, you know, get into this thing quickly? I don't want everything spilling out. I have to be really thoughtful about, you know, maybe the materials on the backside. Can I spray this bag down at the end? Can I rub it in the dirt and it's going to like look okay or still function? And can it take a beating, like actual scuffing? You know, can it rub across rocks or trees or whatever? And so I think that that's what I like to think about, that volcanic environment in Iceland. And then contrasting that with like being on a glacier, photographing on a glacier. I had to shoot a documentary piece for Netflix 6 months ago on top of Iceland's largest glacier, Vatnajökull. And that was a polar opposite, no pun intended, environment that tests your gear in the total opposite way. So I like to think about those two as the contrast, which is why Iceland, I think, is such a perfect testing ground for these things, because you're finding both oftentimes right next door to each other. And so that's usually like a good marker for me. Like, if it can survive that kind of trip, being laid on the ice or the snow, you know, being laid on the ground, being drugged, being thrown in the back of a car, like, then it's good. Then it works for me.
Awesome. So there's the next kind of foray of bag technology:
Yeah.
extreme heat and extreme cold protection.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, all right, Chris, thank you so much for your time and taking time out to talk about your adventures in storytelling and all the great things you're doing with Pelican. Before we say goodbye to you, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh man, well, I'm heading to Greenland in about 10 days. I'll be, just for what it's worth, I'm excited to go there. It's a trip to the west coast of Greenland, which is a remote section. I'm going to ride my bike on the longest navigable road in the country, that goes from like the ice cap to the ocean. So I'm really excited about that. I'll be bringing some minimal gear, probably a small Pelican or two to hold some hard drives and whatnot. But yeah, you know, travel is still at the core of everything I love, and this partnership has really been a fun thing to explore. So stoked to see where it goes.
That's awesome, Chris. Thanks so much for your time. Before we say goodbye to you, is there any particular links or locations on the line you'd like to highlight for us, for our audience to check out?
No, not that I can think of. Just, yeah, my work is out there. Love for you to see it. Love for people to get inspired. And if anybody ever has questions on the places I've been and how they could access it, reach out to me. I'm a very available person. So.
Well, I will highlight chrisburkard.com.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, dude.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again, Chris, for being on the program. Really appreciate it.